This is my Module 3 for EDL 853, Special Education Interviews. My three individuals that I was able to talk with, the first one was a SPED teacher in our elementary, the second one a SPED teacher in the high school, and then finally the third was our junior high administrator. So by being able to talk to people in different positions, it gave a variety of responses. So in talking about the child find procedures, our elementary SPED teacher was the most confident in the method for which we get students identified. A lot of the conversation came back to those interventions, the students' response to those interventions, and what we're doing in the classroom during Tier 3 MTSS time, as well as how the SIT process ties into that. The high school SPED teacher was very unsure of how that process actually worked. There were not many students that she works with that were going through that process as a high school student. And processes have changed over the last couple of years, which made her very unsure and unwilling to give a definite answer on this one. When I spoke with the junior high administrator, a lot of his came back to those additional services that could be brought in to help identify gaps with a student and then maybe try to bridge those gaps. And included in his comments were even the kindergarten screening, which kind of struck me as odd because in working with our elementary SPED teacher as well as our elementary administrator, that had not been a place that we had included any information during identification. It was a spot that maybe highlighted some gaps, but did not actually provide documentation that we would have included during that referral process. The most challenging aspect of the job, I think SPED in general has a very challenging job just because of the span that they have to cover, the number of classrooms they have to cover, students they're dealing with, parents they're dealing with, and then in addition to trying to support those parents, they're also trying to communicate with those classroom teachers. And that was really similar to the response that I received from our elementary SPED teacher. For her to be able to be sure that IEPs are being followed in all classrooms and that students and parents feel that they're getting the support that's warranted by the IEP, it becomes very demanding to do that. In addition, she's just monitoring so many students, so many paras, so many assignments continuously. Speaking with the high school SPED teacher, she brought out, for instance, a teacher who was unwilling to modify a writing assignment that was to be done over a book on, I believe it was a sophomore grade equivalent, and we have a student who has a third grade reading level, but then they were supposed to write a literary response in response to high school literature. So to get this student to write on a level that would be acceptable to this teacher when the reading level is only third grade is just a very unreasonable expectation. And at the high school level, she discussed a lot of the teachers' willingness to make those accommodations and modify assignments, but then also a great deal of teachers who at that point in their educational career feel like the students, if they're going to be in that classroom, should be able to perform at that same level. And then from the admin perspective, just the amount of time that is demanded to complete the paperwork and attend the meetings that are necessary during the SPED process. On the flip side, a lot of rewarding aspects as well, though. Our elementary teacher, getting to work with some of those students from kindergarten to fifth grade, there's a great deal of growth that is viewed during that time. So anytime there's student success, it automatically becomes rewarding. And she also talked about as she gets to work with so many students, staff, and those resources that get pulled in to make these students successful, when you can see the student growth, then it makes all that effort and work and time worth it. Very similar from our high school SPED teacher. She had stories about students who not only were successful in achieving that diploma, but had done so above and beyond what those expectations would have ever been. For instance, she talked about a student who wrote and rewrote a paper, an incredible amount of time and effort that went into this single assignment. but then the following year was able to have the teacher utilize this as the showcased piece for what this assignment should look like. And to know that it was a special education student who was overcoming a disability to be able to achieve that. And she even made the comment about some of these students that go on to succeed in a way general education students choose not to. And I think that should be motivation for all of us to step it up a notch and push beyond what we think our personal limitations are. And then she also discussed that success beyond high school. She's raising these kiddos up not just to get a diploma and pass the 12th grade, but to truly move on with the skills and the attributes that they need to move into society and be successful. So being able to see those students who either progress onto a trade school or community college or just are successful in a job fit is very rewarding for her. And then finally for the administrator, the response was that equality, to see teachers who are finally coming to that place that all the students have that equal footing in the classroom, that no one is far behind others or far ahead of others because those accommodations and services are being handled in a way that everyone has the same opportunity for success. Supervising SPED staff can be quite challenging because we are talking about paras, relationships with other staff members, parents, administrators, in addition to the numerous students that are included. So open communication was one of the big ones that were hit on by all three of those interviews, between the staff, between the parents, between the admin, and that communication, reminding ourselves that it goes in both directions, that it's not only to listen to the concerns, but also to express successes and concerns that we are seeing as well, but being that listening ear so that if anyone has a concern, they feel that they can approach you and it will be handled in a professional and efficient manner. Documentation. I think a lot of times our SPED teachers and SPED paras are trying to pull things together in the end when other things have been seen along the way, but that documentation burden typically falls on one particular individual. So if we have classroom teachers, we have administrators, we have paras, we have SPED teachers, we have parents, all documenting what they're seeing from the student, compiling a portfolio if possible. Then when it comes to those things such as the annual review, it becomes much easier to support the findings and the suggestions. And then that kind of comes back into that communication piece. When you're communicating about successes and growth or concerns, you have the documentation to back up what it is that you're bringing into that conversation. And then my administrator had brought in that collaboration piece amongst staff and parents, making sure that everybody is clear on understanding what those expectations and accommodations are supposed to be. And we need to remember that although our SPED teacher is the expert, that it truly comes down to being the administrator's duty to ensure that those expectations and accommodations are being carried out in the classroom. And we shouldn't put the SPED teacher in the position where they have to approach the regular classroom teacher and confront them on why accommodations are not being carried out. Working effectively with parents comes back to a lot of those same attributes and traits. First of all, that communication piece, ensuring that nothing that comes up in an IEP meeting is new information, but that communication, whether it be through phone call, email, text message, whatever it is that the mode is for that parent to most effectively communicate, that information has already been sent home and that those parents have had time to process that and then come to the IEP and be able to discuss it with prior knowledge. Bringing in those post-high school services, especially in the high school setting. We want to ensure that we're setting students up for success beyond high school, which also means preparing our parents for that transition for those students to move beyond high school. So for instance, the vocational rehab, Kansas Works, pre-employment services, depending on the area, is going to kind of depend on what services you have available. But building those partnerships amongst the community and the school district. And then ensuring that concerns of all are heard. We want this to be a plan that everyone in the room can stand behind and support. And I have seen personally, and I know our administrator has seen as well, that when those parents are on board with the plan that's laid out and they're comfortable with it, they've had their questions answered, they've had their concerns heard, they're much more likely to continue to build on that positive relationship from this point on. In collaborating with the regular education teachers, that's something that has to be consistently ongoing and moving throughout the school year. Many of our students are full inclusion, so they are not pulled to the resource room for primary instruction. So we need to keep in mind that that means our SPED teacher is tracking grades, sharing accommodations, communicating individual needs and expectations back and forth with that regular education teacher. But that same thing needs to happen the other direction as well. Accommodations that are being successful or maybe not being successful. If that information is communicated back to the SPED teacher, there are other suggestions that can be given to help make the student more successful in class. And then communicating about those individual needs, that's information a lot of times the SPED teacher already has because they have worked with the student in the past. But at the same time, any information that that regular ed teacher can bring back or concerns that they can bring back tend to help make that collaboration much more successful. Our high school SPED teacher put it the best, I believe. She says you collaborate with grace. Some of these teachers and paras are coming in, they're new, or maybe they're new to dealing with a SPED student. A little background information about us is that up until the last 2-3 years, we have had a very low special education population. And this is something that we are just now seeing really start to grow. And so for a lot of teachers, they have not had to do any of that modification. If we've had a student who is truly low enough to be SPED, they've been pulled for that instruction. So now that they're seeing students who, for instance, have behavioral issues and are working with the para, there's some need for some education on what the para's role is in the classroom and what the teacher's primary role still is in that room as well. Some teachers allow the accommodations while others want the same product from all. So that's kind of back to that same story that I discussed earlier. So that at that point, that SPED teacher becomes that advocate for that student and ensuring that the IEP accommodations are met in that case, which can create some tense conversations. But then that kind of comes back to, as the administrator had stated, establishing those roles very clearly, ensuring the classroom teacher understands those parameters of the IEP and that they recognize that they are still responsible for the primary instruction of that student. Unless the student is receiving that instruction in the resource room per the IEP, then this should not be a student who is sent out to receive instruction primarily from a paraprofessional. In the advice area, one of the big things was just to show that support, to stand behind the teachers. This is a job, a role that can be very trying and exhausting many days. So knowing that they have an administrator support is very encouraging and very helpful in their position. Establishing those roles, making sure that the teachers and the paras roles are very clear to them, supporting the teacher. If a para tries to circumvent the teacher and can express a complaint, to be sure that you're backing the teacher as that primary authority in the classroom. We want to make sure that the paras support the classroom teacher's authority as well, and we want those teachers to step up and take authority as the student's primary instructor when they're in that classroom rather than pushing that role onto the paraprofessional. And then the advice from my administrator was communication, watching that body language when you're in meetings with parents and other professionals, trying to recognize and head off some of those, whether it be questions or maybe it just be frustrations before they completely surface. And then making sure that there are mutual expectations amongst you and those other educators. We know what we're going to expect from students and the teachers, and ultimately it's the administrator's job to ensure that everyone is carrying out their responsibilities. When looking at the roles between the special education teacher and the building principal, very clear roles, and yet at the same time they've got to work very closely together to be successful and ensure that the student has success in the classroom. So the SPED teacher should be involved in continuously communicating with parents, with students, regular ed teachers, as well as with the administrator. And then the building principal should be supportive and involved in those conversations. Anytime that they're able to come to the table and be part of those conversations, or to just support means for those conversations to happen, it's critical that the administrator do so that they can continue to move forward and embrace student success. The special education teacher should be the expert. They should gather that information. They have knowledge about ways that students learn best when dealing with different learning disabilities. But then at the end of the day, the building principal is the authority and the decision maker. So if the school is not meeting those IEP needs, it's going to fall back on the school as a whole. Therefore, it's critical for that administrator to step up and be that decision maker in those situations. The special education teacher is that well-rounded, experienced team member. But again, at the end of the day, that building principal should be the educational leader. They should be that team captain, leading the team in the direction that the entire team, including regular ed teachers, the parents, the student, and the SPED teacher feel like is best for the student's learning. And then finally, those characteristics in aspiring administrators. So they have to demonstrate communication skills, leadership skills, be able to show fairness in all situations, and be relatable to all of those involved in the process, as well as consistent with their decisions and the way that they move forward. And they've got to be able to show grace and understanding. Right now, mental health and behavioral health play an increasingly large role in why students have IEPs, as well as different components of IEPs. So a greater understanding of those aspects is very valuable at this point. And then they need to be able to balance those academic needs as well as future success. So is our goal a diploma or a fully functioning citizen? Administrators need to be able to balance those two goals and help the team come together and truly create the best plan for student success. And then finally, they've got to be willing to understand the students' learning needs, parents' concerns, as well as the paperwork that's required to support SPED in the educational system. This was a very enlightening assignment. Individuals I've had the opportunity to speak with numerous times and work with repeatedly, however, never truly took the time to look at things through their lens. So I'm excited to continue to learn more about this and to listen to everybody else's videos. So thank you for watching.